Hello everyone and welcome to English Grammar with Max. Today we want to talk about contrast and how to show contrast between two sentences. What words or phrases we use to express contrast between two sentences or two statements. Look, let's start with the most common one. We use but to show contrast between two sentences. I felt ill, but I went to work. These two sentences are kind of in contrast with each other, and we show that contrast with but. It means I felt ill. It means I was not expected to go to work, but I did go to work anyway. This is the meaning of contrast. Another word we use to show contrast is although. I went to work although I felt ill. Sometimes we can use although instead of but and but instead of although. It means we can use them interchangeably, but only sometimes. You need to be careful because sometimes when we use but in the beginning of a sentence, like in this example, I felt ill, but I went to work. But as you can see, we used although before this sentence in here. Although I felt ill, I went to work. It doesn't always work like that, but you need to be careful and you need to pay close attention to the meaning of the sentence. And another difference between although and but is that we could use although in the beginning of the sentence. We could say, although I felt ill, I went to work anyway. Sometimes we add anyway to add emphasis to this contrast. We could say I felt ill, but I went to work anyway. Let me write it here. So, anyway we use for emphasis. We could use anyway with but or with although. I went to work although I felt ill. Although I felt ill, I went to work anyway. And remember one more thing. But and although are both conjunctions. Conjunctions are the words we use to connect two sentences or two phrases together. It is very important to know the meaning of conjunction and what is the difference between a conjunction and an adverb. Okay, another word we use to show contrast is yet. You need to remember that we are using yet not as an adverb in here, but as a conjunction. Because yet could have other meanings too in English. But in here, yet means but it is more formal than but in this use of yet. We didn't invite him, yet he came, or but he came, or but he still came. But we use yet instead of but to sound more formal. The next one is even though. Even though means although, but it feels a bit stronger. So it is stronger than although, but the meaning is very close to although, a little bit stronger. And remember, even though is also a conjunction. Example, they arrived late even though I'd told them not to. You could say they arrived late although I told them not to. We use even though to sound a bit stronger. The next word we use is though. Remember, we don't use though in formal contexts. Though is only used in informal speech or colloquial English or everyday English. Though means although, it is although, and it is also a conjunction. I had invited her, though she didn't come. Remember, there is one difference between though and although. You could bring though at the end of the sentence. Look, I had invited her, though she didn't come. In this example, you could use although instead of though. It could be, I had invited her, although she didn't come. Or you could simply say, I had invited her even though she didn't come. For a stronger contrast. But we can only use though like this. I had invited her, she didn't come though. We use it in a spoken English. So she didn't come though, but we can never say she didn't come although, or she didn't come even though. We can only bring though at the end of the sentence for contrast. Okay, the next one, or the next conjunction we use to show contrast is while. And remember, while is used in formal contexts. And it is a conjunction. You know, a conjunction means that we need to have two sentences to use while, because conjunction joins two sentences to one another. Example, while people have been told to stay at home, you still see lots of people outside. Now remember, we used anyway in some contrasts to show emphasis. We could also use a still in contrast to show emphasis, but in the right place in any sentence. So while we are using it here to show contrast between people have been told to stay at home, you still see lots of people outside. And the next one is whereas. Whereas it is very similar to while, and it is also formal. And it is also a conjunction. It means we need to have two sentences, so whereas could join them together, could link them together. They never wrote back to us, whereas we'd sent them lots of letters. Okay, the next word we use for showing contrast is despite. The difference between despite and the previous things we talked about is that despite is a preposition. And remember, despite and in spite of are synonyms. It means you could use them instead of each other. And remember, because it is a preposition, we cannot use a clause after it. We cannot say that despite I told you. It is wrong. We need to use a noun or a noun phrase after despite or after in spite of. Look, despite her illness. So her illness is a noun phrase. She went to work. And in spite of is a synonym to despite, again, in spite of being ill. And being is a gerund, and we could use a gerund as a noun. As you might remember, after prepositions, we use gerunds. So, after despite and in spite of, we need to use a noun or a noun phrase or a gerund. The next word for contrast is however. However and although sometimes are confusing for a lot of learners, but there is a big difference between these two, between however and although. As we have mentioned before, although is a conjunction. It means it links two sentences to each other. But however is an adverb. It means we need to use however with only one sentence. Look, she felt ill. Look, we need to finish this sentence and then use however. So this is a full stop. This cannot be a comma anymore. She felt ill, the end of the sentence. However, she went to work. And remember, before and after however, we always have punctuation. This punctuation could be in the form of a full stop or a comma. On the other hand is an adverbial phrase. It means it's an adverb, but in the form of a phrase. And it is very similar to the use of however. Internet is good for staying connected. Again, we finish the sentence, full stop. Now, we want to show a contrast between the preceding sentence and the preceding one. So, on the other hand, comma, just like however, we need punctuation before and after however and on the other hand. On the other hand, it could waste lots of time. All right. Now we talked about words and phrases, conjunctions, adverbs, and prepositions we use to show contrast. Now let's do some exercises together. Okay, let's start with the exercises. Underline the correct word or phrase in each sentence. I read the book you suggested. I didn't enjoy it although or however. The answer is however in here, because although is a conjunction and it links two sentences to each other. But as you can see, we have a full stop in here. We have two separate sentences. So we cannot use although, which is a conjunction. We need to use an adverb. And besides, we cannot finish a sentence with although. B. In spite of or although we warned him, Harry still got lost. We use although because in spite of is a preposition. We need a noun or a noun phrase in here, not a clause. C. Although or however, I liked it here. Again, we have two sentences, one following the other one after a comma, so we need a conjunction. We cannot use an adverb. D. Cars are convenient. On the other hand, or whereas, they cause pollution. We use on the other hand because whereas is a conjunction and we have a full stop in here, so we need to use an adverbial phrase and which is followed by a comma. E. I didn't have much time, but or however, but naturally, because we need, as you can see, we have a comma in here and we cannot use an adverb, which is however. We need to use a conjunction, which is but. F. Catherine won the race, although or despite falling over. Again, falling over is a gerund or is a noun phrase, so we need a preposition. We cannot use a conjunction. G. In spite of the delay is the answer, because in spite of is a preposition and the delay is a noun. We can, after although, which is a conjunction, we need to use a clause, which is a sentence. H. I didn't manage to jump over the wall, although I tried twice, or yet I tried twice. Again, the succession or the sequence of the sentences is very important in here, and you need to pay close attention to the meaning of the sentences and check if they make sense with although or with but or yet. Next exercise. Rewrite each sentence beginning as shown. Do not change the meaning. A. Although it was snowing, we went out for a walk. Again, we have despite, so we need a noun. We need a noun or a noun phrase. Despite the snow, we went out for a walk. B. Some experts think prices will fall, but others disagree. We are starting the sentence with while, which is a conjunction. While some experts think prices will fall, comma, others disagree. C. Even though they were losing at halftime, City, which is Manchester City, the football team, won in the end. Despite, we need a noun or a noun phrase. Despite losing at halftime, comma, City won in the end. D. Despite the heat, Diana wore her winter clothes. Although it was hot, although is a conjunction and we need a clause after it. Although it was hot, comma, Diana wore her winter clothes. E. Whereas last summer was good, this summer it's rained all the time. Last summer was good, but this summer it's rained all the time. Again, in here, we could also use although. If it makes sense in the sentence, you could use but or although, but sometimes they are different. F. James had a headache, but he still read until late. In spite of having a headache, or in spite of his headache, you could say we just need a noun phrase. James still read until late. G. Although John hadn't studied, he did well in the test. John hadn't studied, yet he did well in the test. Or although he did well in the test, or but he did well in the test. Again, sometimes they all make sense, but sometimes they are different, and yet is a more formal version of but.
Thank you guys for watching another English Grammar with Max. Stay safe. See you next time.